The following is an audio presentation of Search for the King, read to you by one of its authors, James Griffin. Search for the King was originally written as a stage production by co-authors James Griffin and Danny Bloodworth, where it was performed before a packed house in 2005. If you like this or any of the videos from this channel, please feel free to share, like, comment, or subscribe. Dedication. First, we would like to dedicate this writing to the God that inspired it. 1 Corinthians 1:21 tells us that it's not through wisdom that man knows God, but instead God used the foolishness of preaching to save those that believe. The story that you are about to hear is an illustration of absolute foolishness. Yet we believe that through this foolishness, God has enabled us to present a lighthearted fictional accounting of the very factual events of the gospel. This story may be considered unorthodox, but then again, so is the God that gave it to us. Just imagine the concept of God coming to earth as a man and giving his life for his creation. Now that is unorthodox, but that is exactly what God did. We would also like to thank the actors that took part in this story when it was originally presented as a small stage production. Your memorable portrayals brought life to our characters, which took the story beyond the written page. You developed our characters to such a degree that you gave them vivid personalities that have caused us to see them more like old friends than storybook characters. Lastly, we would like to thank our audience. Whether you are introduced to our tale through this presentation or through the original production, you are the reason that God gave us this story in the first place. We pray that God will use this story to help you in your own search for the King. Chapter 1, A New Hope. Extra, extra, read all about it. Eastern dignitaries report that a new king has been born in Israel. Has an ancient prophecy been fulfilled, or is it merely more government propaganda? Even as the young man proclaims the daily headlines, he knows the possession of, much less distribution of, such material would be considered treason. But what was he to do? He was, after all, the only paperboy in the region. And he had to keep his stories relevant for those that saw his newspaper as a means of keeping informed about the world around them. He did, after all, have his journalistic integrity to think about, not to mention his readership's right to know. Even as he thought of these noble reasons to use in defense of his actions, he knew that the truth was that he saw this as a means of lining his far too shallow pockets. Bottom line, he was a businessman. And he knew that the best way to enhance his sales was by making slanderous accusations against an unpopular monarch such as King Herod. Add to this a statement of hope for the people's liberation from this puppet regime, and what you have is a popular and prosperous newspaper. On the south side of the city, there is great response to the young man's newspaper scrolls. People flock to make their purchase. But as he travels northward, getting closer to Herod's palace, his cries go virtually ignored by those on the street. This public rejection just causes him to shout all the louder, trying to drum up an interest in the morning headlines that surpasses the people's fear of King Herod. But as he approaches the north side of the Temple Mount, he finds himself silenced as he stares at the awe-inspiring citadel. This massive structure with its 40-foot walls and 70-foot towers is perched on a rock formation over 80 feet high. It was established as a fortification to enable the armies of Israel to defend the city of Jerusalem against aggressors, and it has served that purpose well. Even after Israel's defeat by the Romans, the citadel stood as a reminder of what the nation of Israel once was, and an example of what it could be again. Just walking past this powerful structure caused many of the citizens of Jerusalem to take pride in their heritage, remembering not only their patriarchs, but also the great and godly leaders from their past. But that, of course, was before the days of King Herod. After making a number of renovations to this historical site, Herod renamed the stronghold to honor his longtime friend and political ally, Mark Antony. If it's not bad enough that the people are forced to endure Roman legions patrolling their streets, now their bootlicking king has renamed one of their national symbols after an enemy, a Caesar of Rome. The people of Israel were devastated. The once loved citadel, a beacon of hope, is now the hated Fortress Antonia, and this longtime symbol of protection and security has become just another reminder of Israel's state of occupation. Despite its long history, Herod's occupancy within this ancient structure has caused Antonia's current state of turmoil to far surpass anything from its past. His fits of rage and unprovoked violence are infamous, but just as the daily headlines had reported, the previous morning a small group of foreign travelers had asked for an audience with the already volatile king. It seems that these wealthy strangers told him that a child had been born within his own province that they claimed was the true and rightful king of Israel. This challenge to his authority caused Herod to fly into a fit of rage that was so intense that his servants were terrified, and his palace guards stood in a state of paralysis at the mere sound of his angry voice. Herod's insecurities are primarily due to the realization that his power is based on his expertise in political posturing and his ability to make strong allies. This means that his position is dependent on the whims of others, and with the turbulent upheaval in the Roman hierarchy, Herod knows that his position is fleeting at best. So despite his flamboyant yet personable mannerism in political venues, privately, he is a paranoid schizophrenic who is constantly seeing those around him as threats to his kingdom. His paranoia once drove him to execute his former wife, Miriam, and their 2 sons, Alexander and Aristobulus. So there is no way that Herod is going to ignore a new challenge issued by an unknown child. That night, Herod was plagued by visions brought on by many biblical prophecies of the conquering Messiah that was to liberate Israel. He saw the Roman legions topple in the presence of God's Christ, and he saw his own armies defecting in order to serve the new and rightful king of Israel. Herod's visions were so intense that he was convinced that everything that he had worked so hard to obtain was coming to an end. By the next morning, Herod is in rare form. His frustration has reached a fevered pitch, and he is lashing out at just about everyone that crosses his path. Then Herod stops screaming and remains motionless, as if he is listening to something. This causes everyone around him to listen as well, and then they hear the sound of a solitary voice shouting unintelligible words somewhere in the distance. Herod immediately goes to his balcony and peers from atop his fortress in an attempt to see where the voice is coming from. Just beneath him is a young man dressed in a white button-up shirt, black bow tie, a pair of knickers held up by suspenders, a small cloth cap pulled down over his ears, carrying a large amount of newspaper scrolls, hesitantly proclaiming the daily headlines, reporting on Herod's possible demise. That's right, it's the Paperboy, who has finally relocated his courage and is once again trying to sell his papers, but this time he is doing so in the shadow of Antonia. The daily headline sends chills down Herod's already timid spine. Extra, extra, read all about it. Eastern dignitaries report that a new king has been born in Israel. Who is that? Herod screams to no one in particular. Perfect! Now those travelers' slanderous statements are being spread throughout my entire kingdom. With that statement, the crowd quickly disperses. The servants know that their king's anger is sure to intensify, so most of them try to find something to do that requires them to leave his presence. That is, except perhaps one bumbling steward who goes by the name of Tenius. Maybe it is his sense of loyalty to King Herod, or perhaps it's just his lack of common sense. But one thing is for certain, Tenius really doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. "Oh, my king, what troubles you?" Tenius says in an extremely exaggerated state as he runs to his king's side. "You heard what those travelers said, Tenius. If they are right, and a new king has been born in Israel, then that is 2 kings, and according to my calculations, that is 1 king too many." Tenius counts off 2 fingers in a slow and confused manner. Then, as if he finally understands, he responds to Herod's statement by saying, "Oh, my king, surely you're not thinking of retiring?" "He better not retire," says Queen Herod, who came in the room just in time to hear Tenius's question. "We still owe 10 more years on the renovations that he just had to make to this old castle." "I am not retiring," screams King Herod in an agitated state. "I am instead going to end this new king's career before it even begins. The prophets said that he would be born in Bethlehem. With this knowledge, I can dispatch an army so that this baby king will find himself defeated even before his life has begun." Tenius looks at Herod with an expression of absolute shock. "Isn't that a little drastic, Your Majesty? After all, these rumors are merely the rubbish of peasants." "Those were not peasants that stood before me yesterday, Tenius. If this baby king has the support of men such as these, then his threat to me is legitimate, and all legitimate threats to the kingdom must be dealt with quickly and permanently. Oh, my king, before you take such lethal measures, please allow me to call a cousin of mine. He is a detective, and I am sure that he would be able to find the supposed baby king and let you know if there's really need for alarm. Tenius, what makes you think that I would ever trust anyone that is related to the likes of you? Oh, my king, this cousin of mine is very distant, and truthfully he has less to do with me than you do. Then I will meet this detective cousin of yours, but if he does not work out, then the next phase of my plan is the annihilation of the children of Bethlehem. Oh, my king, I'm concerned that your public opinion polls would plummet. Maybe not, Tenius. We could just tell the people that it's a new political movement called free choice. The people can either live with it or die over it. That, Tenius, is their choice. Enough talk. Go and summon this detective cousin of yours and pray that he impresses me. Tenius then flees from the area in search of his cousin. He is hoping to put an end to this madness before Herod does something that he will later regret. The point of no return seems to be quickly approaching, and sadly it appears that the only hope of preventing a national catastrophe is this bumbling servant and as yet unknown detective cousin. Chapter 2. The Announcement. The strangely dressed paperboy that had been selling newspaper scrolls near the walls of Antonia earlier in the week has now traveled to a rural area of Judea. While there, he startles two shepherds as he calls out to no one in particular. Extra, extra, read all about it. Angelic beings sighted in rural Bethlehem. Is it a hoax, a hallucination, or the heavenly host? Did you hear that, Aniston? One of the shepherds says to his counterpart as he laughingly walks out to check on his sheep. Next thing you know, they'll be reporting on little green men from outer space. I don't know, Callus. I think that angels still appear to people if God has a message for them to deliver, answers Aniston. As Callus continues to walk away from Aniston, he looks back towards his friend and says, Well, I can tell you one thing. I've never seen one, and truthfully, I wouldn't believe it even if I did. As Callus turns back to look in the direction that he had been walking, there's a flash of light and a group of angels appear standing in front of him. Upon seeing the angels, Callus takes a step back and reaches into his pocket and withdraws a pair of big-rimmed glasses with extremely thick lenses. And then, with the aid of his glasses, he looks back at the angels standing in front of him. Okay, I believe, Callus cries out as he throws himself to the ground away from the angels. One of the angels takes a step forward and says, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling cloths, lying in a manger. Then all of the angels joined in, saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. Then as suddenly as the angels appeared, they vanished, and the shepherds were once again alone, surrounded by the silence of the night. Did you see that, Aniston? Yeah, I saw it, Aniston said to Callus, and I suggest that we begin our search for the child that they spoke of as soon as possible. Callus and Aniston immediately leave the area in search of the newborn king. But unfortunately for Callus, his poor vision soon separates him from his friend. So while Aniston locates the baby king in Bethlehem, just where the angels had said that he would be, Callus becomes lost and finds himself wandering around a Jerusalem marketplace, where tragically he encounters Herod's bumbling steward Tenius. Their conversation started pleasant enough, but when Callus shared his recent angelic encounter with his newfound friend, he quickly becomes a guest in Herod's imperial dungeon. Callus could not remember the exact charge, but he did remember hearing Tenius saying something about him being a material witness. Chapter 3. The mission begins. At the breaking of dawn, a very sleepy King Herod arose from his bed and entered his personal chamber. As he wearily collapsed into his throne, the many biblical prophecies foretelling the coming of the Messiah consumed his mind, and with each thought he felt his kingdom slipping through his fingers, yet he had no idea of what to do about it. Just then the voice of that infernal Paperboy violated his ears, and the already perturbed king nearly exploded. Extra, extra, read all about it. Is the baby king's claim to the throne legitimate? Unnamed government source confirms that there is an investigation underway. King Herod screams, Tenius! Tenius! Yes, my king, Tenius replies as he runs into the room in an exaggerated state. Did you hear that, Tenius? Who is that boy, and how does he seem to know everything that is going on? Perhaps he's just lucky, my king, Tenius says nervously. No, Tenius, he said that there was an unnamed government source, but there are so few people that even know that we are looking into this. Who do you think this unnamed government source is, Tenius? I have no idea, my king, Tenius says, nearly shaking. Why would you ask me such a question? Have I not always shown myself to be loyal to you? Tenius, why are you acting so strangely? Herod asks with a confused expression. I know that it isn't you. After all, you have a name. Oh, yes, that's true, my king, Tenius says as he wipes the perspiration from his brow. About that same time, a member of the palace guard escorts a man wearing a pair of tan dress slacks that barely cover the top of his socks, a white button-up shirt, a black tie which hardly reaches his chest, a tan trench coat, and a black hat into the palace chamber. Look who is here, my king, Tenius says as he runs over to his cousin Clancy and prepares to introduce the two of them. King Herod, may I present to you my cousin, Detective Clancy Donovan. King Herod stretches his hand toward Detective Donovan. It is a pleasure. Donovan interrupts the king by abruptly reaching his hand out and placing a finger over his mouth. Enough of the small talk, Fancy Pants. I have read the reports of this situation, and I am anxious to get to the bottom of this case. The guards tell me you have a witness in custody. Tenius is visibly shaken by Clancy's rudeness. He steps forward, looking from the enraged face of King Herod to the arrogant glare of Detective Donovan, and finally attempts to defuse the situation by responding to Donovan's question. We currently have two witnesses that claim to have seen angels, Tenius says to Donovan as he gestures with a circular motion with his right hand to imply craziness on the part of the witnesses. Well, are you going to bring the witnesses to me, or do I have to go find them myself? Donovan asks very abruptly. Looking at Tenius, King Herod issues the command, go get me the prisoner. Tenius walks towards the door of the throne room and yells to the guard posted outside, bring me one of the bloody prisoners. After a few moments, Tenius shouts back down the corridor, no, not the bleeding prisoner, the bloody prisoner. Don't you recognize slang words when you hear them? Yeah, that one. A member of the Imperial Guard enters the room with the visually impaired and confused Callus in custody. The guard shoves Callus to the ground in front of Detective Donovan, who then assists Callus to a small stool. Donovan uses a torch and his magnifying glass to shine a light into the prisoner's eyes, and he tells him, now be honest with me about what really happened. But as he speaks, the detective makes a motion as though he were drinking from an imaginary bottle of alcohol, implying that the shepherd may have been intoxicated when he had this apparent vision. I already reported everything that I saw, and I don't drink, said Callus firmly. Detective Donovan, noticing Callus's apparent vision problem, then says, then perhaps it is your eyesight that should be in question. No, sir, I was wearing my prescription eyeglasses at the time. Callus then puts on his big-rimmed glasses with the exceptionally large lenses and looks at Donovan triumphantly. Detective Donovan angrily takes the shepherd's glasses and throws them to the ground. How do I know that you hadn't dropped and broken your glasses like this? Donovan stomps on Callus's glasses arrogantly and grinds them under his foot. As if in answer to Donovan's question, Callus dramatically pulls an extra pair of glasses from beneath his cloak and places them on his face and says, I would have just put on my spare set, like this. And what would have happened if you had dropped and broken your magnifying glass, like this? Callus then reaches out and grabs Donovan's magnifying glass and throws it to the ground. Callus then attempts to stomp on the magnifying glass, but due to his poor vision, he misses completely. Realizing that he is never going to get anywhere arguing with this dim-witted, nearsighted shepherd, he pushes Callus back on the stool and asks, why don't you just wise up and tell us what you know? Your buddy's in there right now, squealing like a pig. Callus looks from person to person in the room with a very confused expression, asking, my buddy? What buddy? Then it dawns on him who Donovan is talking about, and he snaps his fingers. My buddy is a sheep, and sheep don't squeal. The exasperated detective looks at Tenius in disbelief, realizing that his ploy has failed due to the stupidity of others. His buddy is a sheep? You arrested a sheep? I am so sick of working with amateurs, Donovan proclaims. Tenius, King Herod, and the others in the room only looked toward the floor, realizing how silly they all looked. Is there anything else that I can do for you, detective? Callus asks with a grin. No, I think that I'm about as done with you as I can get. Just don't leave town. As Donovan issues the command to the smug shepherd, even he realizes that his words are merely a feeble attempt to maintain some semblance of dignity after their embarrassing verbal exchange. Now that you are done with Mr. Magoo, perhaps you can go to Bethlehem and begin your search. We've already wasted far too much time waiting on you anyway, said King Herod with a scowl. Detective Donovan turns angrily and says, Look, Herod, I am not one of your subjects that can be ordered around like this. Instead of responding to Donovan's verbal insolence, King Herod motions to one of his guards. The guard draws his sword and steps in the direction of the now physically timid Detective Donovan. But we have indeed wasted a great deal of time, so maybe I should be going, agrees Donovan, while looking at Herod's guard. Detective Donovan, the king says, I am going to be sending Tenius with you. Tenius jumps with excitement and grabs the magnifying glass from the floor where the shepherd had thrown it. I work alone, and he, Donovan says, looking at Tenius, would end up slowing me down. Mr. Donovan, I have to keep an eye on you, and Tenius is the very best way that I can do just that, says King Herod sternly. But, Donovan interrupts, if you ever second-guess me again, says King Herod, I'll let my guard finish what he started. Do you understand what I mean? Donovan looks at the very imposing guard as he once again unsheaths his sword and responds, Yeah, I understand. He then looks hesitantly at the very enthusiastic Tenius. You mean I have a new partner? Let's go, Tenius. Detective Donovan and his new partner leave the throne room to begin their investigation. Chapter 4, we have a lead. The ever-diligent Paperboy continues his attempt to tell the people of Israel about the events of the day. But as it is with all things, it takes time for the newspaper to catch on. But the Paperboy is convinced that if he only applies himself, then his newspaper will eventually be distributed to every home in the area. These are the thoughts that keep him going, and this is why he works so hard. His voice suddenly becomes bolder and more confident. Even the Fortress Antonia isn't intimidating him today. After all, he is the press, and the people have a right to know. Extra, extra, read all about it, the Paperboy cries. The child king has been dedicated in the temple. Our two very unlikely heroes, Clancy Donovan and Tenius, are following as closely as they can while still avoiding detection. Suddenly, the Paperboy glances over his shoulder, so Donovan is forced to stop abruptly. Tenius, being his normal clumsy self, is following far too closely, so he runs right into his partner, setting off a minor scuffle between the two. During their altercation, they lose sight of the Paperboy, which even further enrages Donovan. Where'd he go? Donovan demands. Where'd who go? Tenius asks, confused. The Paperboy that we've been following, you idiot. I don't know. What's he look like? That is why I don't work with a partner, Donovan says to no one in particular. King Herod looks from atop the palace wall and sees his two henchmen. What are you two buffoons doing here? I thought I sent you to Bethlehem, Herod demands. You did, your majesty, Donovan says with as much humility as he can muster. But we have followed a Paperboy back to Jerusalem that is reporting that the child king is here. Yes, I have seen this Paperboy, as you call him. Where is he now? Where is who? Tenius asks. The Paperboy, Donovan screams. Oh, I know him, Tenius says. We had a long talk just after I contacted you about conducting the investigation. You did what? Herod demands. So you were the unnamed government source? Of course not, my king. As you said, I have a name.
Never mind, Tenius. Where's the Paperboy now? The king asks. We lost him, sir, Donovan says as he gives an uncomfortable glance in Tenius's direction. That figures. The two of you couldn't track a turtle on a highway, Herod says angrily. What's a highway? Tenius asks. Never mind, Tenius. Do the two of you have anything to report? Herod demands. Donovan hesitantly responds by saying, We know that the child king is here in Jerusalem, and we've heard that his family has been in contact with a local prophet named Simeon. So where is he? We haven't made contact with him yet, Your Highness. Don't you mean that you haven't found him yet, Mr. Donovan? Herod says with a not-so-successful attempt at hiding his anger. Tenius asks, Found who? No more excuses. I have dispatched my troops to kill the children of Bethlehem, and I want you to confirm the child's death. And I want evidence, and I want it now. Oh, my king, you must calm yourself. It is not healthy for you to be so upset, Tenius says soothingly. You bring me confirmation of the death of that child, then I'll calm down. I have an idea. Tenius snaps his fingers with a smile. Why don't you have someone executed? That usually cheers you right up. Do what? Donovan yells at Tenius. I already tried that, and it didn't help. By the way, that reminds me. Your wife stopped by earlier, Tenius, King Herod says. Tenius takes his headgear off and holds it over his heart as he wipes a tear from his eye and says, She always did have the worst timing. I didn't execute her, Tenius, but if you don't go and confirm that my troops have killed that child, then I might have you executed. Come on, Tenius, before you get us both killed. Donovan grabs Tenius by the arm and pulls him down the street. As they lose sight of Antonia, King Herod suddenly grabs his chest and falls to the ground, the victim of an apparent heart attack. Queen Herod falls to her knees and clings to the body of her husband as she weeps. Meanwhile, back on the street, Tenius asks Donovan, Where are we going, cousin? Bethlehem is in the other direction. I do not feel that our investigation is leading us back to Bethlehem, Tenius. I want to speak with this alleged prophet they call Simeon. I feel that he can lead us to the truth, if we can only find him. Chapter 5. Surely this isn't the end. Early the next morning, Tenius and Donovan entered the outer courts of the temple in search of the prophet Simeon. But even their early start was no match for the Paperboy. He was already walking around Jerusalem crying out, Extra, extra, read all about it. King Herod dies of a stress-related heart attack. All government-sanctioned operations ordered to stop immediately. Did you hear that, Tenius? Donovan asks. I told King Herod to stop worrying so much, Tenius says as he wipes his eyes. Good riddance. Herod treated you horribly, Tenius. So why are you so upset about his death? You just didn't know him like I did. He was nice in that evil tyrant kind of way, Tenius says as he sits down and begins to cry. Simeon then enters the outer court of the temple, and he approaches Detective Donovan. Are you the seeker of truth that I've heard is looking for me? Mr. Simeon, I suppose, Donovan says in an arrogant manner. Last time I checked, said Simeon, with a slight laugh in his voice. Now, what can I help you with? Detective Donovan removes a small notepad and begins writing. Though this case is now officially closed, I would still like to tie up some loose ends. Who is this baby that you allegedly prophesied over? You know, the one that many are proclaiming as the true king of Israel? This child that you speak of is a child in flesh only. The spirit that dwells within the child existed before the beginning of time. He is Emmanuel, which is interpreted as God with us. The prophet Isaiah said, For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. This, Detective Donovan, is the child that you seek, and the Lord would have you to know that those that seek shall find, and your very salvation may be much closer than you realize. Simeon then pats Donovan on the shoulder and walks away, leaving Detective Donovan alone with his thoughts. Donovan looks up and raises his voice toward heaven. Can all this be true? Lord, have you truly come to earth to show us the way of salvation? Tenius walks up behind his cousin and says, Well, King Herod is dead. The child is dead, so I guess that our mission has come to a close. No, Tenius, I think that you're underestimating God's ability to protect his Messiah. I am convinced that the child is still very much alive, and if he is alive, then our mission is really just beginning. Chapter 6. Renewed interest in an old investigation. The death of King Herod brought about a temporary transitional period that affected all of those within his realm of influence, but eventually life continued on as normal. As we rejoin our friends, nearly 30 years have passed. Detective Donovan has continued with his investigation. The child that Donovan and Tenius had searched so diligently for has grown up, and he has become the leader of an influential ministry that is quickly impacting all of Israel. The bumbling steward Tenius has gone back into the service of a public official. This time he has secured a position with Caiaphas, the high priest. The strangely dressed Paperboy has become a rather prosperous and influential man, but he is still trying to sell his wares just as he always has. So just beyond the temple in Jerusalem, the Paperboy is walking the streets, calling out to all those that will listen. Extra, extra, read all about it. Pharisee silenced by a local carpenter from Nazareth. Is he the long-awaited Messiah, as some allege, or should we look for another? Caiaphas stood by the window in his personal chamber, watching the events on the street beneath him. Suddenly a Pharisee by the name of Marcus enters the room where Tenius and the high priest are. Your Excellency, stops and gives a funny look at the 3.5-foot soldier that is standing beside Caiaphas. He may be small, but he's mean, and he works for jelly beans, Caiaphas says in answer to Marcus's funny expression. I wouldn't be willing to pay him in anything else, Marcus says arrogantly. The guard steps forward with sword in hand and snarls at Marcus, who instantly recants his previous attitude. My apologies, Your Excellency. I meant no disrespect. File your report and be gone, Caiaphas says as he takes a small amount of jelly beans from a container located just beside his seat and gives them to his guard in order to calm him down. The guard moves back to Caiaphas' side. Your Excellency, we must do something about this Jesus of Nazareth. Tenius, who is busy working in the area, responds by saying, I've heard of him. Tenius, this is a private conversation, so I would appreciate it if you could go and find something else to do. Yes, Your Holiness. Tenius then leaves the room. Marcus, you must be more careful. I do not fully trust Tenius. I only hired him because of his connection with King Herod. I thought he would make a strong political ally, but instead he has only given me a strong headache. My apologies, Your Eminence, Marcus responds. So I take it that our agent was unsuccessful? He followed your instructions to the T, but when he asked Jesus where his power came from, he turned it around on us. He asked us where John's power came from. Very clever, Caiaphas remarks. He knew that to legitimize John would also legitimize him. Perhaps we've underestimated this Jesus. He's very clever, Caiaphas says. What do we do now, Marcus asks. Just keep an eye on him for now. Our time has not yet come, but mark my words, it will come, and it will be soon. Yes, Your Eminence, Marcus responds. Send Tenius back in here as you leave. I need to speak with my steward. Marcus leaves the room, and within a few moments, Tenius comes back in. Oh, my! Tenius stops abruptly with a perplexed expression. Oh, my! Oh, my! What do you want me to call you? Tenius asks. Excellency will be fine, Caiaphas responds. Tenius, turning away from the high priest, says, At least he's not conceited. What did you say, Tenius? Tenius nervously responds, I said that at least I'm well treated. Tenius, Caiaphas says, ignoring his last statement, tell me everything that you know about this Jesus of Nazareth. Well, I guess that I know just about everything that there is to know about him. My cousin and I led the investigation into his birth. I was working for King Herod at the time. God rest his soul. Tenius begins acting as if he is crying. Caiaphas, ignoring Tenius's display of emotions, continues the conversation. So where did you find him? Find who? Tenius says, while wiping his eyes. Jesus of Nazareth. Oh, he wasn't from Nazareth then. Never mind, Tenius. Perhaps I should speak to this detective cousin of yours. Oh, you'll like him, but I'm not real sure where he is right now. Then find him. Find who? Your detective cousin. At this point, Caiaphas is becoming red-faced and angry. Oh, you know my cousin Clancy? Caiaphas, not only agitated but also disgusted, says, No, Tenius, I was hoping that you could introduce us. Introduce who? That was it. Caiaphas explodes on his newly hired steward. Go and find me your cousin and bring him to me now. Tenius wisely leaves the room as quickly as possible. Chapter 7. Haven't I seen you before? Just outside of the city limits of Jericho, the daily headlines are causing quite a stir. Extra, extra, read all about it. Miracles, deliverance, and the gospel preached to the poor. Has God come to earth? Only time will tell. As the words echo from the paperboy's mouth, a throng of people instantly surround him. Gone were the days when he was scoffed at for his appearance and proclamations. Now people relied on him to bring them the daily news, and the paperboy loved it. This was his readership, and though he has become wealthy enough to hire others to distribute his papers, he still prefers being on the streets doing it himself. Detective Donovan was standing just a few feet away, but he never even noticed his old acquaintance. He was focused on a blind man that was begging on the opposite side of the street. Alms, alms for the poor, shouts the blind man to the passing crowd. Detective Donovan then approaches the visually impaired beggar and says, Excuse me, are you blind? No, I just like to keep my eyes shut. It's kind of like taking a nap without the sleep, says the blind man sarcastically. You're very funny, says Donovan as he bites his tongue in an effort to not lose his temper. You look very familiar to me. Have we met before? Don't think so, the blind man responds. But my name is Bartimaeus, and I know that I've never seen you before. Ha ha! I'm serious. I still haven't seen you. Get it? Bartimaeus laughs hysterically. Yeah, I get it, Donovan responds unamused. I know that I've seen you somewhere before. Did you have a run-in with old King Herod about 30 years ago? No, but my brother did. He was a shepherd, claimed to have seen angels, but of course I've never seen them myself. But then again, I've never seen anything. Ha ha! The blind man laughed again at his little joke. Are you really blind? Asked Donovan, while he waves his hand in front of the blind man's face. No, I just act like it for prestige. Detective Donovan then takes a small ball from his trench coat and hits Bartimaeus between the eyes with it. You do that for? Bartimaeus asks as he rubs his head where the ball had hit him. I had to know if you were really blind or not. What is your infatuation with my eyesight? Have you ever heard of Jesus of Nazareth? Donovan asks curiously. I'm blind, not deaf. Of course I've heard of him. Well, he's headed this way. Are you kidding? I've heard that he does miracles. Do you think that he would do a miracle for me? I don't know, but I have every intention of finding out. You just make sure that Jesus sees you when he comes by. Oh, I assure you, I won't let an opportunity like this pass me by. Jesus! Jesus! He's not here yet, Bartimaeus. Well, in that case, alms? Alms for the poor? Donovan goes back across the street, disgusted by the fact that he must involve others in his investigation. He finally finds a suitable location and takes a seat in the shade of some small trees so he can keep an eye on the blind beggar, Bartimaeus. Chapter 8. Old friends meet again. Tenius' search for his cousin was not going very well, and honestly, he was on the verge of giving up when he heard a very familiar voice. Extra, extra, read all about it. High priest shows renewed interest in Messiah's ministry. Will they unite, or will the tension between them intensify? It was the paperboy, and Tenius perked up immediately. He knew that if the paperboy was around, then he was following a big story, and odds are that big story involved Jesus, and if Jesus were in the area, then his cousin Clancy would not be far behind. Tenius scanned his surroundings in anticipation, and then he finally saw him. He was seated in a small area of grass just beyond the road, and it appeared that he was watching a blind beggar for some reason. Tenius ran to him, yelling, Oh, cousin, I'm so glad that I found you. Tenius, Donovan exclaims, I knew that you would return. Just then, a small contingent of temple police caught up to Tenius. Unbeknown to his cousin Clancy, they were Tenius' escort. Donovan asks his old friend, Are you in some sort of trouble, Tenius? Who, me? Tenius says laughingly. Of course not. To the contrary, this is my security detachment. One of the officers clears his throat as he shakes his head no. Well, not mine per se, but they are with me, at least for today. Tenius looks timidly at the officer that had just shaken his head no, and this time he gives a brief nod. Well, I can see that they are with you, but why? It's my new job, cousin. You mean that somebody actually hired you, Donovan asks. Well, of course they did, and lucky for them, I was available, Tenius responds. Yeah, lucky them. Anyway, Tenius, just wait until I tell you everything that I've seen and heard over the past several years. Actually, I would rather that you gave that information to my new boss. Your new boss? Who is that? What? Tenius asks with a confused expression. Your new boss, Donovan responds. Oh, do you know him? Tenius asks. I'm not playing this game with you every time that I see you, Donovan responds. What game? Never mind, Tenius. Who is this new boss of yours? Caiaphas, Tenius says, smiling. You mean the high priest? Donovan asks questioningly. Yes, so you do know him. Not personally. Well, you will soon, because he wants to meet you, Tenius says proudly. Why would the high priest want to meet with me? Well, Tenius says, acting slightly offended, for one thing, because he knows that you are my cousin. I really wish that you would stop telling people that we are related, Donovan responds. Oh, cousin, don't worry so much about your low standing in life, because I'm not ashamed of you, Tenius says triumphantly. Ashamed of me? Never mind, Tenius. What does he want to speak to me about? He wants to know everything that you can tell him about this Jesus that you have been following. Jesus! Blind Bartimaeus screams. Not yet, Bartimaeus, Donovan yells across the street, but I'll let you know. Then redirecting the conversation back to Tenius. Why? What's his reasoning? He is the high priest, Tenius says. Why wouldn't he be interested in a local religious leader? Forgive me for being a little curious, but I'm concerned about his motive. After all, Caiaphas has been known to follow his own agenda more than he does God's, Donovan says. That's not fair. You just said that you don't even know Caiaphas, yet now you're making accusations like that about him, Tenius says offendedly. Detective Donovan sighs and finally responds, You're right. I will meet with Caiaphas, and as long as he is really searching for the truth, then I will tell him everything that I know. But right now, I am kind of in the middle of something, so I want you to meet with these people. Donovan writes a list of names on a piece of paper, then tears it out of his notebook and gives it to Tenius. Allow these people to speak with your new boss, and if he is really looking for the truth, then I am convinced that he will want to hear what they have to say, and I will be along shortly. Tenius gives the list of names to the temple guards that are with him. Their commander distributes the names amongst his men, and then sends them out in search of Donovan's group of witnesses. Farewell, cousin. I shall see you soon, Tenius says as he leaves his cousin Clancy. Farewell, Tenius. Chapter 9. Moment of Choice. Extra, extra, read all about it. Witnesses go to the home of the high priest, telling him about the miracles of Jesus. Is he going to become a believer? What is that infernal Paperboy talking about? Does he just make this stuff up as he goes along? Tenius enters the room with a large smile on his face, followed by a group of people. Oh, my priest! I have really outdone myself this time. You sent me to find one witness, and I came back with 4. At least now I know where the blasphemous story came from, Caiaphas says angrily. Tenius, do you realize the public relations fiasco you have caused me? I sent you to find a detective, and you came back with a group of beggars and thieves. What could they possibly have to say that would interest me? But they are followers of Jesus, Your Excellency, Tenius said in explanation. I am not looking for his followers. I was wanting someone who was impartial. Well, these people were impartial. At least that is until they got to know him. Yeah, and I was happy. At least that is until I got to know you, Tenius. A young woman steps forward. Please, Your Excellency, my name is Mary Magdalene. Just hear what we have to say, and then judge if the claims of Jesus are legitimate. The things that we have seen and heard are testimony enough to his identity. Fine, but make it fast, Caiaphas says as he settles back into his seat. A middle-aged woman timidly approaches Caiaphas. Your Excellency, I had suffered with an issue of blood for 12 years, and I literally spent every penny that I had trying to find a cure. But then I touched Jesus' garment, and my sickness left me immediately. Caiaphas snickered at her statement. If he were truly of God, he would have condemned you for touching him while you were sick. A young woman steps forward, brushing tears from her eyes. Your Excellency, I am utterly ashamed to admit my past, but I was once caught in the act of adultery and should have been stoned to death, but Jesus showed me mercy. By superseding the law of God, Caiaphas yells. If I had been there, I would have shown you mercy by ending your sinful existence. Dear sir, a Canaanite woman steps forward. Surely you'll have mercy on a child. My child was tormented by a demon, and Jesus set her free. You're not even Jewish, nor was your child, so I won't even acknowledge you, and Jesus wouldn't have either if he were truly from God. Caiaphas turns to Mary Magdalene and asks, do you have anything further to add to this nonsense, or has this interview reached its conclusion? Mary Magdalene shakes her head in disgust. There's a great deal that I would love to tell you about Jesus, but with your closed-mindedness, there seems to be no need to continue. At this time, blind Bartimaeus storms into the room, followed closely by Donovan. I was blind, but now I see, yells Bartimaeus. He stops and looks at the witnesses, then at Caiaphas, each time proclaiming, I see you, and I see you, and I see all of you. What is the meaning of this? Caiaphas demands. Your Excellency, it is true, Donovan adds. I saw it myself. This man was completely blind, and Jesus restored his vision. If you look at Jesus' many miracles and at all of his teachings, then I'm sure that you will agree that he is exactly who he claims to be. You wish to preach to me? I am God's high priest. I will not be talked to in this manner. But your Excellency, we are talking about salvation, Donovan says. Caiaphas responds indignantly, I'm not concerned about salvation. Well, that's apparent, Mary Magdalene comments. And that's enough, Caiaphas responds. If there are any more comments from any of you, I will have all of you charged with blasphemy. Now get out. Donovan and all of the other witnesses step towards the door as if to leave. Tenius, on the other hand, remains with Caiaphas and his guard. Surely you're not planning on staying in his service, Tenius, Donovan asks, gesturing toward Caiaphas. You know that what he is doing is wrong. I am sorry, cousin, but I cannot go with you. This is who I am. No, Tenius, this is what you do. Then let me do it, Tenius sobs. I am not doing anything wrong. I'm only doing my job. Detective Donovan, I believe that you have outstayed your welcome. Leave now, or you won't leave at all, Caiaphas snarls. Detective Donovan looks at Caiaphas in disgust, and then returns his attention to Tenius. Goodbye, old friend. I hope that you will see the truth before it is too late. Chapter 10. Point of No Return. The high priest once again hears the paperboy proclaiming the daily headlines from the street beneath him. Extra, extra, read all about it. A disciple of Jesus has been spotted associating with Pharisees. Have these two ministries united? The Pharisee Marcus enters the room where Caiaphas is already standing. Your Excellency, I must speak with you. Wait, Marcus. I want to get to the bottom of today's headlines, and I think that I know exactly where to go. Tenius, get in here now. Yes, Your Excellency. Tenius enters the room. Your Excellency, I really must speak with you, Marcus interrupts. Agitated, Caiaphas concedes. Leave me for now, Tenius, but don't get too far away. Tenius nods and goes back out of the room. This better be important, Marcus. It is, Your Excellency. I bring word. The headline in the daily paper have already brought word, and I figure that it came from Tenius. But my word is accurate, Your Excellency. Then deliver it. I have discussed your proposition with the disciple that they call Judas, and he has accepted your offer. Jesus will be in our hands before nightfall. Very good. Have him meet us outside of the temple court this evening. Yes, my priest. Marcus quickly leaves the room. Tenius comes back into Caiaphas's personal chamber nervously. Your Excellency. What? Caiaphas asks. You wanted to see me, sir. Never mind, Tenius. Right now I have too many other things on my mind. Caiaphas then second-guesses his decision and decides to send his dim-witted steward on a rather morally questionable task. On second thought, did you hear this morning's headline? Yes, Your Excellency. These scandalous headlines are your fault, but I will provide you with a way to redeem yourself to my good graces. I want you to gather a group of the temple guards together. I have a very important assignment for you, and you may need a small army to accompany you. From the looks of your guard, a small army is about all I could get, Tenius says as he chuckles. The guard growls angrily at Tenius. Just go, Tenius, and do not fail me. Marcus will meet you outside the temple after this evening's special service. Very well, Your Excellency. Tenius leaves the room to gather temple police as Caiaphas is instructed. Chapter 11. I'm sorry for what I've done. The nation of Israel is in a state of shock. In one dramatic blow, Caiaphas proves that he is not a friend of Jesus or his followers. The Paperboy solemnly announces this morning's headline as he cries, "Extra, extra, read all about it. The Messiah has been arrested. It looks like the Supreme Court of Israel will soon meet the Supreme Being." Tenius is weeping and stumbling on the road, calling for Detective Donovan hysterically. "Cousin, cousin!" He then collapses to the ground sobbing. Detective Donovan, hearing Tenius's call, comes running to his cousin's side. "What is it, Tenius? What's wrong?" "It's my ear, cousin." "What about your ear, Tenius?" "It's my ear, cousin." "What about it?" "It's been healed." Detective Donovan looks at his cousin inquisitively. "I never knew there was anything wrong with your ear, Tenius." "There wasn't," Tenius sobs. Detective Donovan shakes Tenius by the shoulders. "You need to get hold of yourself and tell me what you're talking about." "Caiaphas sent us to arrest Jesus, and when we did, one of his disciples cut off my ear. Then, Tenius begins to cry again. "Then what, Tenius?" "Jesus reached out," Tenius says while still crying. "He cupped my ear, and he healed me." "Look at my ear, Clancy. Why would he heal me when I was there to hurt him?" "Because that's who he is, Tenius. That is what I have been trying to tell you, but you wouldn't listen to me." "I'm listening now, cousin, but unfortunately it is now too late." "Maybe not. Where did they take him to, Tenius?" "They took him to Caiaphas's prison, and they're going to kill him, cousin." "Not if I can help it," Donovan says as he takes off running in the direction of the temple. Chapter 12. Not as long as I'm alive. As Detective Donovan rounds the corner, he runs right into the Paperboy. He purchases one of the papers, and his eyes quickly scan the main article, and it's enough to make him sick. He looks at the Paperboy, who just shrugs as he starts to walk past Donovan. "How can you write this junk? You've followed him as long as I have. You know who he is." "It's called impartiality, Detective. In your line of work, I'd have thought that you'd be more familiar with it," the Paperboy says. Then he begins announcing the daily headlines. "Extra, extra, read all about it. Trial of the Ages is taking place after hours and in secret. Is God on trial in Jerusalem, or is it a simple case of blasphemy?" "Blasphemy," Donovan reads, shaking his head. Then he wads up the paper and throws it to the ground. He then walks into the temple and enters Caiaphas's chambers. "Where is he, Caiaphas?" Donovan demands. "He is where all criminals should be," Caiaphas answers abruptly. "You're the only criminal that I see," Donovan responds angrily. "Watch yourself, Donovan, or you will find yourself right alongside this precious Jesus of yours. I would rather be with Jesus in prison than be free and have to live with the likes of you. You weak-minded fools are all the same. Well, I'm afraid that you are too late, Mr. Donovan. At this very moment, your beloved Messiah is hanging from a cross, suspended somewhere between life and death, heaven and earth." "I ask you again, where is he, Caiaphas?" Donovan demands. "Your insolence has come to an end. I will not be spoken to as if I, the high priest of Israel, would have to answer to the likes of you. No, Caiaphas, you don't have to answer to me, but one day you will have to stand before and answer to God. And down deep you know it. Fear is all over you, Caiaphas. Why won't you listen to it?" Caiaphas stands there shaking as if he were trying to make a decision, until he finally yells for his guard to take Donovan away. "Maybe a few days in my dungeon will change your perception on things." Detective Donovan backs away as if he's going to fight. "If you resist him, my full-size staff will get involved, and they will not be as gentle with you as he will. The 3.5-foot guard then escorts Donovan out of the room. Chapter 13. The End of the Beginning. After a few days in the dungeon, Caiaphas finally releases Detective Donovan. As he stumbles down the street, he is visibly shaking, and he is confused. He has no idea what has been taking place the last few days, so he takes a special interest in the daily headlines. Extra, extra, read all about it. Trial ends with an execution. The high priest declares that Jesus was not the true Messiah. Detective Donovan falls to his knees and cries out to God, "Forgive me, Lord. I knew who you were, yet I failed to intervene on your behalf. I am so sorry. I am so sorry." Donovan looks down at the ground and begins to weep silently. As he sits in the street, crying, the 4 witnesses that he had earlier introduced to Tenius come to his side. The woman that has been caught in adultery asks Donovan, "Clancy, have you heard what has happened?" Detective Donovan looks up as though he were holding back tears. "Have I heard what?" Mary Magdalene smiles a comforting smile and said, "The Lord has risen, Clancy, just as he said that he would." "Risen? You mean like from the dead?" "Yes, Clancy, I have seen him myself," Mary Magdalene says. "But how is that possible?" The woman that had the issue of blood steps forward. "As the Lord himself told us, with God all things are possible." Tenius then comes to his old friend. "Cousin, did they tell you the great news? It's true, for I have seen him." Bartimaeus then adds, "I saw him too. He forgave me, cousin, and now he is waiting for you." Just as Jesus is waiting for Detective Donovan, he is also waiting for many of you. Will you heed his call, or will you instead pursue your own agendas? The choice is yours. Each of us has the choice to either accept who he is and what he has done for us, or we can reject him as Herod and Caiaphas did. Before you make that decision, think of where these men are now. All of their authority and their prestige mean nothing to them now. They would gladly exchange it with you for the time that you have left. If they had the opportunity to live their lives over again, I assure you that their choices would be much different. But their time is over, while yours is not. You still have time available, but time is a fleeting thing that is here today and gone tomorrow. So choose wisely before someone writes a story of your regrets and your inability to right your wrong choices. Call upon God while today is still today, because tomorrow may never come.